Hey, Andy.
Hey, Jed, how are you?
I'm doing well. We're really going legit. We had Mackie Raymond last time, and we got Mike Kirst with us now. I mean, you would think that we know what we're doing here or something.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. And we're also I feel like people are starting to wonder if this is like the California education podcast or not, because we're getting all these rock stars from California. But we're really excited to have Mike. This is I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
So it's great to have you here, Mike. Well, before it gets started, we will remind this is Andy Rotherham and Jed Wallace, and this is WonkyFolk. And yes, it helps us if you guys sign up and give us likes and all those kinds of things. So thank you for all of that. And meanwhile, Mike, it's just so great to have you here. Can you get us started with your own bio? I don't even want to take a run at it. I mean, but before we got on, you were talking about these things from, early on in your career that I knew nothing about. And I consider myself kind of, a Mike Kirst aficionado. So can you just acquaint our listeners with, what your background has been and just the depth that you bring to all these issues?
Right. Well, I'm in my sixth decade of education policy and education implementation work. And I got started very young. I came right out of Harvard with a PhD in political economy. The education building was next to us, but I was at what was now called the Kennedy School of Public Policy, and I never walked in the door. And so how am I here? So I wanted to work in Washington, and it was really hot in those days with the New Frontier and the Great Society. And so I applied to the Office of Management and Budget, and which premier organization, and they said they had openings in veterans, water pollution, and K-12 education. And I said, out of that lot, I'll take K-12 education, and that's how I'm on your interview today. So I worked with the Title I program and John Gardner's task force on education and worked at OMB. It was terrific. I wanted to get closer to the field of education, so I transferred to through the civil service into the Office of Education and now Department of Education, and worked there and was the first guy I hired to administer Title I, and then worked for also the U.S. Senate, where I was staff director of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Employment, Manpower, and Poverty. Everything's going great, and I worked for a senator, Clark of Pennsylvania, where my home is, and so he lost in a shocking election. And Humphrey lost, and I was fired and had 6 weeks to get out of my office, 2 children. I'd had this feeler from Stanford University to be a professor, something I never, ever thought of. I thought, oh, what the hell, I'll go out there and, the Democrats will be back. And so I came out to be professor of education and taught school finance and federal and state policy and so on. So to finish off on the background, in 1974, I was introduced by a friend at the business school to an up-and-coming politician named Jerry Brown. And we got along great. He's Jesuitical. If you say A, he says Z. If you say Z, he'd say A. So I really liked this sparring and was known as his sparring partner for the So there I was with him at 35, president of the California State Board of Education. 40 years later, we're in our his final term, and it's 40 years later, and I'm president of the State Board of Education. So that's the background. It's very deep in federal and state, and as we get to it, my lack of, I think, working at a local school district level will show up in my comments and my reflections on where I want to go in my career now and have been working on more recently.
All right, fantastic. So you were with Jerry Brown in his Linda Ronstadt years, and then you were also with him in his charter school years. Is that an accurate?
Right? He was. Yes, I was his chief advisor in education. I also worked with him when he was mayor in Oakland, and we tried to take over the schools, but couldn't
Right.
get it as mayor. So yes, all those years we've been working together, and you know we knew so much more when we came back, and than we did when we left in 1982.
Yeah, his evolution as a politician, I thought, was really fascinating. And I'm eager to hear as you talk about your evolution, as you think about things differently, just with more experience as well. He was very interesting to watch, as were you. And you coming back and doing the state board again was a really cool thing. Was a really cool thing to see. So listen, what are you working on now? Let's start, and we can sort of start with some of the national stuff, and then we can dig down to California, which Jed obviously and you know
Yeah.
than I do.
Well, I'm working on two things. One is to push agendas that I came to after writing a paper for the Learning Policy Institute called Standards-Based Reform, Looking Back to Look Forward. And I tried to assess what we did in California in the 8 years with Brown and what I did, and look at what was successful and what wasn't so successful, and what I would do over again. It was, so here you are with all my experience, and you're still learning. And so James Carville said it's the economy, stupid, and my conclusion was it's the teachers, stupid, and we've never had a policy that really enabled teachers to implement higher levels of curriculum and instruction, like science for reading. I was a big supporter of the Common Core, and we really implemented that with vigor and money, but we never really prepared our teaching workforce and our principals to carry that out. And so that's one of the themes of the discussion. And then the one thing, and the other thing I'm working on is re-examining the relationship between K-12 education and post-secondary education, and expanding our vision of that. So just a hint of coming attractions, a third of our workforce works through either a license or a certificate or a credential, a third of it. Who knows anything about that? So I'm looking at ages 16 to 25 in all forms of what I call educational attainment, and that we have much more educational attainment when you look at the combination of K-12 and higher ed, and you look broadly beyond just college completion and an associate degree completion, both of which percentages are up. But that's the second thing I'm working on. So I'll stop there.
Jed, where do you want to start? There's a lot there. We can talk about teachers, obviously the curriculum standards, the Common Core piece.
I would start with that.
There's a lot there. Where do you want to start, Jed?
Well, I'm kind of curious just about this teacher support work, and the idea of what do we call micro credentials or badges. And I will say, if you guys haven't been to a Harmony school in Texas, I really, really encourage you to go to Harmony. They just, they got 45,000 kids, and they're just doing incredibly well. But one of the hallmarks of the organization is that outside every classroom, the teachers proudly demonstrate the badges that they've earned over time. And it's like, some of them have 50, 60, 80 badges there. And the kids also know what badges the teachers have. I don't know. Some of them, Mike, you were saying in your piece, if we get it to be too focused on individual areas of interest, not that great from your standpoint in terms of what you're trying to do. But if you can deconstruct the individual practices, the individual expertises we're wanting the teachers to get good at, perhaps this is a whole new way of going forward. So I really thought that was an interesting idea.
Well, yeah, let me start from the mea culpa perception of what I think we did not do, and I did not do in my final 8 years, was we had no strategy, big strategy, to let's take the Common Core. California adopted the Common Core. We never changed it, and we were wholeheartedly behind it. So we had clear standards. We have one of the better assessments, I think, in Smarter Balance, for example, state assessments. But we never developed and never had a vision of how would you enable the teachers to really teach the new Common Core mathematics and reading. And I'm talking about at full scale. We had a lot of help in a lot of what I call islands and deserts. The islands of success were where we had grants from the Gates Foundation and state money to really prepare the teachers to teach it. But, we're huge. We have 350,000 teachers. I should have been reaching, 3/4 of those. So to do that. So my big conclusion was that, we as a country have never tackled the challenge of professional development. And I think science of reading will, go the same way. And California's new mathematics projects will go the same way. So you've got to get a strategy. Now, what the specific thing to demonstrate this I'm pushing now is why do we end? Almost all states have teacher certification operations. Okay, and they have standards, and it's been getting better over time. Certainly in California, ours has improved. We have they have to actually demonstrate teaching and so on. Our exit exam is much stronger. Why do states stop being responsible for professional learning and professional development after they're certified? Why? I mean, it's you're assuming that they're inoculated or something. You've got these 2 shots and that's it. Unless so, my recommendation is that, for example, in California, we have a thing called the California Teacher Commission. Most states do it through the department. I've actually, rewritten that law that says the state is responsible for the full continuum, the life course of teaching. And just like credentials, you need to have a policy that states what they need to know and be able to do if you're going to implement science of reading. And you got to do it through all the grades. Yeah. So I just saw a big RAND study where there is some professional learning, but it's K2, and so, even Mississippi, which I have links to in all my work, to their professional learning part. They didn't really focus on the secondary schools nearly as much as the elementary. So it's got to be big, it's got to be deep, and you've got to have some state policy and leadership there. And then thinking about it, the biggest hang up in this recommendation is not only, of course, the politics and what will the unions think and so on, but how would you really motivate the teachers to do this? Mm-hmm. I mean, you just can't ram it down their throats, and you're going to get the unions in the union states like California if you don't talk with them and carefully think about the incentives. So that led me to the idea of micro credentials, which they would be rewarded for, and that they would get a credential to teach science of reading. As California envisions it. We're doing a new mathematics curriculum, which is very different conceptually, and I think you got to keep your eyes on that. And so we're trying to do it there. So
how do you ensure quality in this, though, Mike? Because I mean, so like, and the interesting thing, like the unions, there was a time when like the AFT in New York, for instance, was offering the best PD around, and like people thought it was like very high quality professional learning. So the like with micro credentials, you could see the unions actually playing a role there, not being against it. But how do you just across the board guarantee quality? Because right now we sort of have a de facto system, right, with steps and lanes, and nobody thinks it's really getting us quality. So at scale, particularly in a state like yours, but even like in a state like mine, Virginia, where we're still we're still talking, about a good number of teachers so preparation and training at scale. How would you ensure quality in your model?
Well, let me address the unions and then come to more directly to your question. If you look on the website, the NEA has 175 credentials. I have links to this in all I'm talking about in the paper I did for Brookings Institution, the Brown Center there.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and so the unions are not adverse to credentials. What they're afraid of, at least what I hear, is that they won't have enough control over it, and that it'll be too much top down, and it will impede their independence. And that gets to the second part of your question, because some of that concern I don't know how to deal with, because I'm advocating strongly that this state professional development plan and strategy and implementation would be tied to the state's curriculum and instructional standards. NEA has 175 credentials, and you can take them for anything you want, right. And so I would want to ham it right into what we're trying to do with these, and there I think we'll run into tension. But we may be able to negotiate out of that. I'm not sure where that'll go, but I think that you've got to tie it to the curriculum and standards, and that'll tie to the assessments. And that makes people, some of the teacher organizations, nervous. So I'm struggling with exactly how to handle that bridge.
Yeah, it seems like without really robust quality assurance, you're going to get what we have now, just sort of in different bottles. And, honestly, I think the NEA right now, people may not be in a big hurry to give them control. They're having a fair amount of trouble with curriculum and, some issues with anti-Semitism and so forth, and some of the curriculum they've embraced. The AFT has a stronger record here, and the AFT is still, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, they've stayed pretty good on science of reading. But it just seems like the quality assurance here, that's always the problem that we come back to. And it's really
I think we can work that out. I think there's ways of tying my two interests together. There's lots of credentials out there of all kinds of fields that have high quality. There's also a lot out there that don't have high quality, and they have a credential. But I think there's so much experience with credentials, and there's a whole world that a lot of us, I don't think, know much about, which I'm getting into, of what credentials are like and what their quality control is. So I don't think that's insurmountable to design it well. And if you look at Mississippi's website on how they do it, they build a lot of quality into it. And they're getting results. So I think we can deal with that. This whole field we're discussing is highly undeveloped, and I'm hoping we can get somewhere. Well, turning to the national scene generally, what I'm so encouraged about is how many of the people, including the three of us here and many others, are now talking more about curriculum and instruction and teacher development. And it's not just accountability and standards and so on. So my conclusion from my work is most of my career, and I'm going to use my turtle metaphor, Richard Elmore taught me that policy, Mike, he would say, is the shell of the turtle. And inside the turtle is the moving parts. That's deep into curriculum and instruction. So I've spent a lot of career working on the shell. And yes, I've, reformed finance programs in several states, including my own. And that's important. But unless you're getting into those moving parts, you're never going to get where you want to go. So I think that's really the challenge. But I'm seeing, a change in the dialogue. I don't know whether you two do, but there's people that wouldn't have been that focused on curriculum instruction and are now getting away from that. And it's not just accountability. I mean, this stuff that all we have to do is go back to no Child Left Behind and have high standards. We've learned that that's not enough.
Well, I think what I'm seeing, like, to give a nod to Elmore, that's something I think he was right about. I think I was wrong about, and others were. The theory of action was sort of, if you put in place the accountability, it's going to create the incentives, and you'll start to see this kind of support on things like curriculum and build that capacity. And Elmore said that theory of action wasn't going to happen, and he turned out to be right. And I mean, there was other things with No Child Behind politics and stuff, but like this idea that you would really see a robust marketplace come up, it just didn't happen. The support wasn't always there, wasn't there necessarily in the public sector at the state level. And so that's, I think, has caused people to think, okay, what do we need to do intentionally around those things? And then like a lively debate about where do you do it? Do you do it at the state level? Do you do it at the federal level? Some combination? What should that look like? And that seems like kind of where we are now. But like the idea that the sort of black box, the classroom, that if you create the right incentives, that people will do that work and that will happen. That I think that theory, people are like, no, we got to be much more intentional about those aspects, and that's good. And the thing about charter schools, they're not top down, but the good ones are super intentional about all of those things.
Well, the thing I've been focusing on lately as it relates to science of reading is what exactly does the shell consist of? And, we have the Mississippi example, we have Tennessee, we have Louisiana, we have North Carolina. There are aspects of a science of reading approach that seem to have crossed state lines. They are kind of being called the Southern Surge right now. And, I also have my son who's got a friend whose father ended up getting involved in the science of reading policy wars in California and was just so disheartened by just how watered down the science of reading bill is. And everyone's trying to present it as some kind of example of Mississippi-like thinking. But most people that get into it, they look at California as there's no real accountability for choosing materials. There's not any specificity about the kinds of practices that are wanted and not wanted. And we delegate all sorts of authority to the locals. And I don't think we're going to see much Mississippi-like pedagogy in vast swaths of California now. But I don't know, Mike, maybe do you see it differently? Have you followed the?
Yeah, I think you're too pessimistic. I don't think what's in a bill, I think there's enough in the California bill that with the right implementation and the right people leading it, we could do it. It's got enough of a mandate that, and this is from somebody that's worked up there a lot, that with the right leadership and follow through, it could be done. And so, you've got enough examples to fill in the blanks. You don't need every sentence in the law you can overwrite the law in some ways. So, and lead the resistance. So, I'm thinking that, there's a lot of technology out there as to how to do this. And our problem is huge scale, bigger than I am worried about the other details of the bill. We have momentum. I'm more worried about the big deal in California is not reading. We have in my view, the most interesting and exciting math curriculum which the state board has adopted in the country. It's a big shift to more conceptual learning, more applied learning, and I'm when I think about the problems in math are much deeper than reading, and we have and nobody talks about the science of mathematics. What you have is a war of mathematics, not a science. We haven't, it's like Russia and Ukraine. We haven't been able to bring the sides together, and they're still out there lobbing, drones at each other.
Yeah, although the Russians are pretty good at math. A lot of parents are paying for their kids to get Russian math, extracurricular. But yeah, I take your point. I mean, on the science of reading bill, I think it actually points up this problem on like quality and so forth, which is like everybody the conventional like on reading, like amateurs talk about the unions, professionals talk about the teacher prep programs and the ed schools, right? And that's where like a lot of the resistance lies. And I worry, you know, Mississippi, the states that have done it well, these were pretty prescriptive bills around these things. They also made sure you had a high quality, knowledge rich curriculum, which I think is an anathema to some of the ed schools. I've been struck, Mike, I don't know if this was your experience, like in Virginia, when we're writing standards, like the media portrays it as all left, right, but the real core fights are often about pedagogy. And they're about, are you going to have actual content and facts? Or are you just going to have sort of themes and real progressive pedagogy? And obviously that is one where, like, you know, you talk to like a cognitive psychologist, like a Dan Willingham or somebody, they'll tell you, you need the content, you need the knowledge rich curriculum, but it's treated like a jump ball. You know, who knows, maybe we should do whatever. And I feel like that's like the bigger point of resistance. That's the shoal this stuff's going to run up on, maybe with math too, because like some of these things,
yeah,
they're not real big on math facts, and they're not big on teaching kids algorithms and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's deeper than math, the disagreements, than here. And we saw that in California with the personal attacks that were really out of bounds by various factions attacking each other personally and sort of doxing them. And, you know, it's brutal.
You get really nasty emails about math. I'm sure we'll get some from this podcast. Those people do feel strongly on both sides. And you do, like, you tend to get like really pretty intense feedback.
But we have made a decision. The framework seems to be in California, the mathematics framework, not leading to that much resistance. So I think there's a will to go ahead. It'll be very hard to do, but the policy wonks, they, you know, a lot of us, including me, are just really getting into this in a way that I think is going to get to the root of the cause of our lack of an implementation. And so I'm encouraged by, at least we've changed the wonkery where in terms of where they're headed in some ways. You've still got these arguments about vouchers and so on.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go. You're the first to share with me, at least in a while, that you're encouraged about a narrative specific to pedagogy and instruction happening at a national level. Because basically every conversation I have has nothing to do, except for science of reading wars. And, you know, aside from that, it's really around universal vouchers, ESAs, these kinds of things. What observations do you have about that new phenomenon? Because when you were on the state board, essentially ESAs and vouchers were not ascendant. They were not moving, and now they really are. So what do you have to share on that?
Yeah, my comments about the national was really around the wonks and not about federal policy. Federal policy is just noise and distracting noise in many ways. And so I think that's really not helping, but it's much in cultural issues. So I think that probably the ESEAs, the overwhelming amount of money will go to people that are currently in private schools. And that won't add much value. So they'll get more of a break on tuition, and the private schools will be able to raise their prices and perhaps pay their teachers more. But I don't think there's going to be an explosion of enrollment in micro schools and backyard schools and so on. And I don't know what to make of this ability to buy tutors and so on, and various toys for your children. So I think it's going to end up being the usual thing, which is it'll benefit the higher income, middle higher income that are going to private schools, and and it'll help some private schools that are very low tuition, particularly in the southeastern parts of the country. So that's my thought on what it's going to be, and it'll have a lot of support from the Republican Party.
How do you think it's going to play in a place like California? So you guys, California is probably not going to opt in to participate because it's got the name Trump attached to it, and that's enough. And it's a Democratic state, and they're not going to like this, so they won't participate. But it's a national program, and so you get a dollar for dollar tax credit, $1,700. There's a lot of wealthy people in California who will be able to take advantage of that, and so their money will be going elsewhere. To the Southeast, as you're talking about, or to scholarship programs in Chicago or, Rust Belt cities or whatever. What do you think, like, how are the politics of that going to play in California? Will that, because it's such a strong Democratic state, it won't matter? Will that create pressure on state leadership?
I don't know. We don't know who the state leadership will be. The 800-pound elephant in California is the governor. The governor has an enormous amount of power, and just structurally, any governor. And so I have no idea who's going to be governor. And I know if Jerry Brown had been governor, it would be very, very interesting. It's right down his alley. But I don't see quite any Jerry Browns out there in the candidate pool we have so far. But who's to know? They're still entering the thing. So I don't know. We don't know. It'll be the state superintendent. But I still don't know what the regulations are going to be.
Right.
And how loose is it? Could we use some of the money for things we really want to do, like we've talked about before? Could we use this to leverage that? I don't know. And so it's I'm also intrigued with the block grants.
Right.
Boy, would I like to have had those block grants.
Yeah.
When we went Obama, Arnie Duncan came into the state of California and held press conferences criticizing the governor for not going along with mandatory teacher evaluation. And we were at war with the Obama administration. DeVos comes in, and all of a sudden, we got the flexibility to do some more things we wanted to do. So if I could see these block grants going to what I'm talking about in terms of instruction. I can see an IDEA block grant going towards redoing special education in California. So a really aggressive governor can get his hands on that and do something. So the block grants are attracting my attention more than the ESSA, but I don't know on ESSA.
But I feel like on both, there's a common thread, which is like, you're giving voice, and I appreciate giving voice. Like, when you talk to a lot of people privately, they're like, oh yeah, I would like to have a block grant. That would be great. And a lot of Democratic governors are like, well, if I could do with these, you do the scholarship program because that's the law, but if you could also use that tax credit money to run programs for special needs kids or extra tutoring or for English language learners, like you could do all kinds of interesting stuff with it. They're like, yeah, then that might be something we could opt into. And on all this stuff, the Trump administration always has a path of like, could they do something that kind of brings people together and it is broad, or can they do something that's like as politically divisive as possible and drives like wedges as much as possible? And almost invariably, they choose the wedge, right? So they could be doing, like with these block grants, they could be saying, we're going to give you, like extra money. Here's a dividend. We're going to restructure the department. We're going to give states a dividend. They can be making it so that blue states like, yeah, okay, we will do this, but they're not. They want everybody to howl. And I think they're going to face the exact same choice on the tax credits. They could do it in a way that's actually broadly appealing because you could use it for a lot of different things, not just tuition. Or they could do it in a way that's sort of maximally politically divisive. And again, like I think on most, not every single thing, but overall in general, like divisiveness is always the safe bet with them. And I don't know. So we'll time will tell, but there's opportunities here that are like, constantly squandered.
I think it's just going to come down to how much money there is. And if there's a lot of money that's available for program enhancement within the traditional system, even if some of that money ends up going to private school tuition stuff, we're going to have a lot of big players in California and in New York and these blue states say we need to keep this money within our states. But right. We'll see if the number of people who participate ends up being really small and the dollar amounts don't seem that high, maybe they'll stay out for the long term. But I don't think that's.
Well, we've talked about this. I think one of the things they're going to have to do is figure out how do you get to people who get their taxes prepared for them, make sure they're aware of it. Like since it's only 1,700, it doesn't matter if 1,700 if you're people like us or you're Bill Gates. So like they're going to have to figure out how do you where do people aggregate and where can you start to get so everybody's getting asked, hey, do you want to participate in this? Otherwise, it won't be. Rick Hess thinks Margaret Rosa thinks 28 billion a year once it's fully up. Rick Hess thinks like 7 or 8. So there's a pretty wide variance of assumptions on how much uptake you're going to get.
So we'll see. So Mike, I want to I'd love to ask your thoughts charter schools and charter schools nationally and charter schools in California. But before we do, I just had one question about LCFF that I wanted to ask you about because it kind of relates to the money as well. And
you should probably explain what that is for non-Californians, Jed.
And also to like accountability too. So the local control funding formula was California's successful effort in 2012 and 13 to redirect large amounts of money to schools based upon the numbers of low income and other special needs kids that they served. It was a massive accomplishment and all of that. And one of the biggest changes that happened in the design of the whole system, when it was first proposed, it was called the weighted student formula, and it didn't get through. Brown recognized, wait a second, local control is better branding. They called it local control funding formula. But from a substance standpoint, the thing that was really different about year one and year one, the money was supposed to flow to the school level. Every school was going to receive the dollars based upon the schools the students that they serve at the school level. But they changed the design of LCFF such that it would go down to the district level. And once it was at the district level, CTA endorsed it, many other people endorsed it, and it got through. But what it's done then for big school districts, it's given them the leeway to move money where they want to move it. And a lot of the schools that were intended to get the funding didn't get it. And so and we still fight for it. And maybe your feeling now, Mike, is they're actually getting it in the end. I don't know. But I just feel like this is a fundamental, foundational issue, around the design of that system and weighted student formulas that are happening across the country right now. Do you have any observations on this?
Yeah, I sure do. Well, I disagree with what you're implying. I support and supported the district level, and it was never. I don't think there was any doubt that it was going to be that way because that's the way Brown and I wanted to go. And the legislature was also inclined that way. And I think over time, it's the right decision. So you can't, and of course, as I said, I was worked on Title I. That's a school-based program. I know a whole lot about that. And I agree with that at the federal level. I think school-based is there. There's so little amount of our expenditure, only 8% in California, that, I would still do Title I at the school level. But I think the districts, remember when it passed, we were coming out of a recession. And they had just been hammered, and to tie all that money down to schools was really a problem. We had a pandemic. There again, you need flexibility, and I think that running, we have 10 to 11,000 schools. Running a formula that is strict on exactly earmarking money for 10,000 schools and saying, you got to pass it all down in this way. Brown and I agreed we just don't know enough to do that kind of specification. Maybe you guys are brighter than we are, but we didn't. Brown was a Jesuit training, and he preached humility. And he wrote Arnie Duncan a letter, said, "You need to proceed with more humility." And so that would be our thought about it at this point. And so there's so many external variables that come in. Declining enrollment. Now they have huge declining enrollment. And you're tying it to schools. They need to adjust across the districts. So, for what it's worth, I thought we made the right choice. One thing I wanted and we got funding for the charter schools and put them in the regular formula rather than having them outside with their own formula. So that I think was important as the money went up. So we sort of were able to incorporate that in the system. And we were going to give our proposal was to give the charter schools whatever, treat them as districts and give them whatever their pupil populations were. And then we had to compromise on that they have to have the district average spending, and they couldn't get the spending with the kids they had.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the people who criticize what we did in terms of district flexibility have ever run a district, and so I'll leave it there.
I love it. Well, there are two issues that are here. One is just around fairness, and I'm just sorry, but like in LA, teaching in South Central and seeing how much money Beaudry sucked away from our school in South Central, seeing how much money is sucked away from Watts, seeing how much money is sucked away from East LA. There's a foundational, fundamental problem here. And I think there's a pretty easy answer. Send the money to the kids for whom it was intended. Yes, it makes it hard for school district managers to deal with it, but that's its own issue. And there may be other ways to solve that problem. On the charter school side, the problem, and I have a call in an hour and 3 minutes with a guy who's still mad at this in Oakland, right? Where there's the concentration cap. So a charter school cannot be funded any higher than what their school district's concentration level is. So if I serve 100% low, special needs kids or low income and the unduplicated count, and Oakland is only 85%, well, the 15% additional that we would get because of the kids that we serve, we just don't get it. And the cynic, in our view, says the reason that we put that cap in place is because if there was funding that went to the school level like that, or charter schools would get that additional money, there would be a financial incentive for schools across the state to convert to charter status. And there were status quo interests that just did not want that to happen. So we have to make these designs. You're right, Mike, the overall funding benefit for charter schools within the local control funding formula, totally game changing. It was incredible, the progress that was made there. And so I constantly had to remind our base that we have to stay focused on the enormous progress that was made. At the same time, there were these other things, and I hope down the road, California finds a way to make sure that the highest needs kids are the ones that actually get additional resources at levels beyond what is currently happening, I think.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any momentum to change that at this point. In fact, I'm disappointed that there's not enough momentum to change the finance formula. It's very, very popular. It's outmoded in many ways. It's run off of school lunch. Well, if everybody has school lunch, it's not a real good indicator of the free school lunch. So I'm for changing parts of it, and I'm having trouble getting momentum because it's so popular.
Yeah.
It's hard, and it's hard to figure out what measure to use, because the logical thing would have been then to switch to something like Medicaid. But with the recent tax bill, now that's not necessarily a great and so there's a little bit of a question about what actually is a good measure of accurate measure of poverty right now that schools can use. Some of the low-hanging fruit is now gone for different reasons. I mean, the universal lunch thing is good; more kids are getting lunch, but it, as you to your point, renders it not a great measure of actual levels of poverty. We should probably.
I got to have a couple charter school questions here, Mike, or Andy, will you let me hear?
You're like a dog with a bone with these charter schools.
Well, look, I mean, I actually, so these other issues, but hey, there's a profound difference in California now than when you were the chair of the state board. I mean, there in California, my view is, and look, the advocates did a great job. They did a great job. It would have been way, way worse without the advocates. But if you look in the history of the charter school movement, there's never been a policy loss as severe as 1505 and 1507 that happened in 2019. There are all sorts of things that happen that are bad. But one of the things was the state board is no longer an appeal body for charter schools across the state. And so I just wonder, what are your observations, Mike, about those changes? How bad are they? What would you suggest to charter school people going forward? Should we take a run at them once we have a new governor and perhaps a new way to tackle the problem? Any thoughts you have here?
Yes. Well, I was a strong supporter of charter schools, and obviously the governor was. When he couldn't take over the schools in Oakland, he started his own charter schools, and that he was a strong supporter. Yes, we used to. What has happened in California since Brown left in 2019 is a tragedy. I mean, they just kneecapped it, and in terms of the charter movement. The big one was that all the local districts have to do is show a fiscal impact from a charter. Of course, they're losing enrollment. They have a fiscal impact. If they can show a fiscal impact, then you can deny the charter. So that was, catastrophic, I think. Then they cut off the appeal line to the state board. We were the second largest charter operator in California off of LA Unified and going up. Charters overall were going up on a 45-degree angle in California under Brown's years. He used to, every charter school we denied at the state board level, I had to go into his office and justify it, and I was guilty until proven innocent. And so I had a very high bar to reach, and basically we got around to there were problems here. So I think it's really too bad. And yes, there has to be some political initiative to revive it. I don't know. I think, I don't know whether this will work, and I haven't thought a lot about it, but now that S is around and the savings accounts and the federal law on the tax deductions, I think one way to go at it is the thing that I always did was say charters or public schools. I never used the word charter schools. I used charter public schools, and that you're under such attack now that you need the traditional education lobbies. You need an alternative. People need choice. They need difference. They need innovation. They need things that parents want bottom up. They need entrepreneurs to enter the field, and you've given that argument over to people that will aid people that have passed laws which will aid basically the existing private schools, in my judgment. So that way of saying we're the counterpoint, we're the public school counterpoint to this choice voucher movement, is the only thing I can think of, and so I think I would like to try that out as a PR campaign and maybe work. I think even the unions would say I'd rather have a charter school than a private school. So there we are.
Well, I can go off on charters forever, but you were a great state board chair. Just generally, you showed a lot of courage on charter issues over and over again. And yeah, you made some hard calls on some schools' appeals. Most of them, I think you made a good decision. There are a couple, we talked about them over and over again, but that's what you have. That's why you want an authorizer at the state level, to be able to make those tough judgment calls. And if you have a strong board chair and board generally, you're going to make some good decisions. And it's a shame that California doesn't have that option right now. Andy, any thoughts? I also want to let Mike go in whatever direction we haven't let it go.
Yeah, I think one thing I think we haven't talked about yet in depth that would be good before we wrap up is just this post-secondary question. So, Mike, you've been doing this work, and you're talking about if you just look narrowly at college, or you look narrowly at certain high school attainment measures, you get one picture. If you look more broadly, you get another. And you were talking about all the people who get various kinds of certificates in this country and all sorts of various kinds of non-degree credentials, which seems likely to increase with the recent tax bill as this workforce Pell. So you can do sort of use Pell Grant for short-term programs. There's different views about what that's going to mean in terms of quality and for the program, but it's going to mean an expansion of this kind of thing. And I just wanted to hear your take on that, what it means for K-12. And then a question that I'm particularly interested in, a lot of those people are the great thing about America, we have a second chance system. If things don't go well for you the first time and we do a bad job delivering education for you, you can still pursue it other ways. And you see that, I find community colleges to be kind of inspiring that way, but you also see that in various kinds of different kinds of training programs and so forth. And a lot of this pathways and this push for this work comes out of Europe, but we're not a European country in terms of our culture around this kind of thing. And so that's kind of wanted to hear you riff on that a little bit.
Well, let me step back and answer the question after I sort of frame what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
So the narrative out there on education is K-12 education is declining, and it is in test scores, or it's stagnant. Higher education is under attack for DEI and anti-Semitism, and losing popular support.
Yeah.
And so we're really, in a very, very bad way. So what I have tried to do, and I agree that the testing is alarming, is to reframe go back to another concept, which is called educational attainment. And I start off by thinking, well, the economists, Rick Hanushek's good friend of mine, and they talk about all the lost income and economic growth from low education skills. And I keep thinking, well, if you combine K-12 and higher education, the picture isn't, there's a very different picture of educational attainment in terms of its growth, not only its growth in numbers at the higher ed level, particularly, but also at the attainment rates. So the attainment rates are up. So I began to think about what's the broadest screen I could look at of all the options that are open for people between ages 16 and 25. And then what is the real picture of educational attainment when you get done with that? I learned a lot of things since I was 17 or since 15 years old under PISA. We should be judging this system a little bit more broadly and particularly if you're going to talk about the economy. So I looked at everything that I thought that was relevant. I'm sure there's some things that I don't. And just to give you the more positive picture, here are areas of dramatic or significant growth in participation and educational attainment. And agreed, some of these, there's quality issues and all of that. So I'll start with high school, advanced placement. We're all aware of the startling increase. Now, if you go back, say, to Nation at Risk, which Mackie Raymond's study did for Hoover that you had on in your last one, we're way up in AP. And I mean, indisputable. Second, huge increase in dual enrollment. Dual enrollment is skyrocketing, and the majority of it takes place on community college campuses. And even if there's some problems with, and there are, with some of the quality of it, there's so much more of it, it all can't be bad. Even Mike Petrilli, I argue with this over, it can't all be worthless. And I notice he's the
only one that makes me sound insufferable. Yeah.
Yeah, he's citing that as well. Okay. Also up significantly is the completion of 4-year degrees. The Complete College America movement, which was, if you look at 6 and 8 years, they're up in the last 10 years by 8 to 8%, which is a lot. So associate degrees are more tricky because a lot of students leave those, don't get the degree because they transfer and think, who needs an associate's degree? So, but they're still up. Up a lot are apprenticeships. That's, however, apprenticeships account for less than 1% of our labor force. So it's up a lot, and there's all this talk in Congress about it. It's minuscule, but it's up. Okay, credentials. That's up a whole lot. We've talked about that, and even in education, it's up a lot in terms of the broader micro-credentials. But, licenses, certificates, credentials, all over the place. I got onto this partly. I go to the doctor, like my eye doctor, and I see 3 people that hold credentials who give me eye tests before I see the doctor. I get 10 minutes from the doctor. I get 20 minutes from the people that have certificates that are running all these tests on my eyes. I have glaucoma and so on. But, it's just all over the place. Licenses. I go to the barber. He's got a license. I did a study with Dick Scott on all the entities of post-secondary education in the 6-county Bay Area. There's 350 of them. We would look at truck driver schools. I could never drive a truck, so there, that's up. And military education is often overlooked, and it is also very strong. How they can take these people that can barely pass the ASVAB and make them into repairing some complex thing on an aircraft carrier. How are they doing this? I mean, it's amazing what they're doing. 5% of our population from high school goes into the military. Okay, now the ones, and I'll conclude with what we don't know anything much about. And first of all, is on-the-job training. Let me back up. First of all, is career and technical education. There is almost no studies on this. The last ones were by NCES, and they're very old. We've got all this 2x2 pathways. You know about it a lot out in California, called Link Learning. 2 years of high school that link to 2 years of college. This is really expanding. It's a clear pathway. There's other pathways through community college that are much more developed now rather than a grab bag of courses. So, but we just don't know. On-the-job training, virtually very little. It's a huge. And then declining is correctional education, education in our juvenile facilities for kids who are incarcerated. And then we know very little about some of the certificates out there and the licenses. But we're growing in understanding them, but not so much. We just don't have a handle. The licenses and certificates are all over the place. It's a third of the workforce operates with a license, certificate, or credential. So it's either up or data gaps. And so this is what I'm working on. And I think we need to understand this much better and expand our discussion. And I don't know why we talk about apprenticeships so much and not about credentials and certificates and all that. And Washington hasn't even woken up to this. So there I am.
It's fascinating. I think people who don't follow are struck by how the data gaps, I think it reminds me of like high school graduation rates, like 20, 25 years ago. People just assumed you would know this stuff and there'd be, and in fact, like the data was terrible. We didn't really have good. And I feel like it's the same way, like what's happening. And states are working on it. And you're seeing a lot of efforts. I'll brag on Virginia a little bit. We've been trying to do a lot of work to improve our data systems and actually track people and see what's happening. I know I say track people and like a certain kind of person, flips out, but actually just like keep track of what is actually happening so we can figure out what's working, what's not working, what does it look like in the economy. But there's a lot of work to be done there. So I think, Mike, like one thing I'll just say that I admire about you, like you're talking about the next stage in your career after saying you've been at this for 6 decades, and that's just a tremendously admirable thing. And I have so much respect for it that you want to continue and you will continue to contribute. It's great.
Yeah, it reminds me of in the last months with Don Shalvey, talked to him a few times, and he came to this case 16 thing. Jed, keep working on that, keep pushing on that. So Mike, you and Don came to a similar, I think, recognition.
And Larry Rosenstock too. What is it with these Californians?
That's continuing mischief making, for many, many decades. So Mike, it's just been great to connect with you, hear what you're doing lately. And we look forward to staying in touch, and, please keep us aware of whatever the next thing is that you're working on, because we'll be curious.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.